Welcome to the first ever episode of The Hedge. This show is going to be about everything related to hoops to give you the edge on your bets as well as your fantasy basketball lineup. I'm your host, Steve Inman, and I'm very lucky to be joined by Kev Mahserejian, the rotosurgeon himself. Kev, how are you? Thank you for being here.
I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks for having me on. First ever episode, honored to be the first ever guest. So yeah, looking forward to this.
Kev is one of our basketball writers here on the Game Day website and is at rotosurgeon on Twitter. Kev, I want to get right into it with you. The Nets, the big trade, the big three is finally here. Kyrie Irving is back and they're right now plus 300 to win on PointsBet. Are you going to bet on the Brooklyn Nets to win it all?
Absolutely not. I like this team. It's a really fun team. A lot of scoring, a lot of shooting, not a lot of defense. As much as the scoring can mitigate the effects of their poor defense, it will come to fruition in the playoffs when they have to face teams like the Bucks. The 76ers even could be troubles for them in the Eastern Conference. So let's not even get to the Lakers, the Clippers, or any team on the West Coast. Let's think about the teams on the East that can match up with them pretty well. I know they have great ball handlers, great three-point shooters. Kevin Durant, coming off the Achilles, is playing as well as he's ever been. His true shooting percentage right now is literally 675, which is the highest of his career. The defense has gone down a little bit, but losing Jared Allen in that trade for James Harden is a big hit. DeAndre Jordan's rim protection has gone down. They don't really have many wing defenders. Their backcourt defensively isn't great. So they're going to have to basically score 120, 130 points per game to at least have a chance to beat teams in a 7-game series. In a single game, sure, I'll take them over any team in the NBA, if I had to. But over the course of 7 games, when you wear down teams, when those fouls aren't getting called for Harden as often, we've seen him fail in the playoffs year in and year out with great players around him. So I'm just not comfortable betting on them, particularly just even to get out of the East, Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Kev. I mean, for one, let's say they do get to the finals. Who is guarding LeBron James and Anthony Davis? I mean, that is a mismatch if I've ever heard one. You're going to have, is DeAndre Jordan going to guard Anthony Davis? That sounds insane to me right now, the way he's playing. And look, they're going to try to go pick up a center, on the, waivers wire, if you will, with fantasy basketball terms, as, the buyout market comes in a couple months. But I don't think they're going to find the impact guy that's going to be able to start for a championship caliber team. So they're going with DeAndre Jordan. We're going to see if he can pick up his play defensively at all. But I'm very concerned because right now Kevin Durant is their best defender, who is coming off of a torn Achilles, as we all know. They seem to be asking too much from him. You have to be the MVP offensively, and now we need you to be our defensive stopper as well. I mean, when does it end with him? So I don't know. I don't really like it right now. Obviously they're a great fun team. I'll be watching for sure the next few games, but right now I would say let's not bet the plus 300 on PointsBet with the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan. They could pick up Dwayne Dedmon. That's a really good center pickup they could get if they were to opt for that market, because DeAndre Jordan just played 38 minutes against the Bucks. They did win that game by 2. But again, in a single game, they can go toe to toe with anyone just because they could score 140 if they want. But for the most part, I just think worn down, I don't like this team. I know we haven't really seen them with Kyrie and Harden and Durant in full strength where they've played 10, 15 games at least together. I just can't buy it right now.
I really like the Dwayne Dedmon idea. I mean, he's a guy who has been that kind of defensive-minded center who could really help them out right now. And look, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving love DeAndre Jordan. We know that. That's been a big storyline the last couple of years. But at the same time, Steve Nash, the day before they traded Jared Allen, bench DeAndre Jordan. He was a DNP coach's decision the game before. So it is, clearly they know he's not the DeAndre Jordan of old. So I do expect them to go out and be looking for a center. And I think that is the key between them, potentially going to the finals.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It doesn't even have to be a center, just a big in general. It could be a power forward for another team that they can play at center. They really don't have anyone. You can't play Kevin Durant at the 5. He's too that would have worked pre-Achilles. I just don't think he has he has that in him, and he doesn't even want to do that. Like, why would Kevin Durant want to go up against, Giannis in the paint or like Anthony Davis in the playoffs? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Even if they were able to convince him that this is a good idea, then who guards LeBron? Like, you're not putting James Harden on LeBron. So it doesn't work. I mean, I'm curious to see how this roster transforms in the next year. Over the summer, they're going to have their mid-level exception. I would think they'll be better then. But for now, I think, as we said, let's pass on the Nets for this upcoming championship season. But I want to talk about this trade from a fantasy angle. Kev, you're obviously the guy to talk to about this. I want to know who helped their stock the most in this trade.
Who helped their stock the most? Okay,
who are the fantasy guys? Yeah,
no. Yeah, no, I got you. This is tricky right now to navigate because obviously Victor Oladipo, he moved from Indiana to Houston. He gets to play on a team. He just had a 42% usage rate in this past game that the Houston Rockets played. That's insanely massive. That's more than James Harden had with the Rockets. Albeit John Wall was out, but John Wall dealing with his knee issue. He had his Achilles tear. He's coming off of two of the most serious injuries any athlete could suffer. And he's getting managed to a crazy amount. He's getting rested the weekend, like he'll get rested for a full week. So Oladipo helped his stock a ton. Someone who was hurt a bit, but is hurt now even more is Karis LeVert, because they found a large or small mass. They found a mass on his kidney. And obviously, God forbid this be something super serious and it's just something that could get removed or it's benign. But Karis LeVert, he probably was helped the most, if anything, because his life got saved via this trade. He probably wouldn't have had the team doctors check him for any reason otherwise. But I think Jared Allen, in a situation where the Cleveland Cavaliers trade Andre Drummond and view Jared Allen as their center of the future, he's the low-key big winner here because Andre Drummond's on a one-year deal. He's playing great basketball. I think he has some good trade value on his, I believe, $25 million deal. So if Andre Drummond were to get moved, Jared Allen is the biggest winner in this trade. Fantasy-wise, James Harden takes a bit of a ding. Kyrie takes a ding. Kevin Durant takes a ding, but not too much. They're all like top 25 players at worst. So they should be fine. Oladipo gets the biggest current boost, but I think Jared Allen gets the biggest long-term boost.
That is good to know. So anybody looking out right now, if you're looking for the future, Jared Allen's a guy you should be targeting in trades right now, where his value could be upped maybe a month from now, 2 months from now, before the trade deadline, hoping that Andre Drummond is moved to a contender. I think that makes a ton of sense right there. I'm going to do the same thing. In terms of, you mentioned that those guys have, Durant, Irving, and Harden have their value dinged a little bit. What do you think of like the value for a guy like Andre Drummond? Does his value take a big hit in the short term right now with Jared Allen in the picture?
Not necessarily. The Cleveland Cavaliers already ran like a ton of bigs on the floor anyway. They were playing like Larry Nance, who's a power forward, but they could slide him at C. They played JaVale McGee a ton. They had Kevin Love earlier in the season. They lost him. The Cavaliers are so weird. They don't care. They're going to play their archaic big man 35 minutes a game if they feel like it. And then they'll play Jared Allen next to him, like overlap if they feel like it. They're not trying to win games. I know they have like a decent record. They're almost 500, but for the most part, like, I don't think Andre Drummond's value is struck too much by this Allen deal. If it's Allen for the short term who takes the hit, but long term they should both be fine. If anything, Andre Drummond might, he might not score as much, but he should be fine overall.
That's great stuff, Kev. I want to talk about a recent article you wrote for the Game Day, some key waiver wire pickups. I want you to tell me about Immanuel Quickley, a rookie that not too many people outside of New York know too much about.
I feel like New York and Kentucky. Wildcat fans, know and love Quickley. He was fantastic for them last year. He's an instant. He's just, he's instant offense. Basically, he's scored at least double-digit points in each of his last 4 games. He's averaging about 2 threes per game. He gets you he gets you some assists, and a couple steals. But for the most part, he's a fantastic free throw shooter. He's only missed 1 free throw all season, and that's on more than 20 attempts. Quickley is the perfect fit next to a guard like RJ Barrett, because RJ Barrett is he's a ball handler, he's a scorer, he's a rebounder. He can do a little bit of everything. He's just a terrible shooter. Yeah. So he shrinks the floor whenever he's there. He's good at, I wouldn't say he's even good at it, but what he does as just a massive usage guy is the ball's always in his hands. And playing a center like Mitchell Robinson, playing a power forward like Julius Randle, who is shooting better, you just can't play those kinds of guys with RJ Barrett. But in the backcourt, you need someone like Immanuel Quickley. So I think Tom Thibodeau is learning that Alfred Payton and RJ Barrett are just like the clunkiest fit in the league in terms of backcourt. So Quickley's getting more minutes. He's getting a little more acclimated to the offense. They're just going to give him the ball and go. Essentially in garbage time right now, they've been using him for the early part of the season, but more recently they've been using him in more primary minutes in the first half necessarily primarily in the first half, I'd say. So Quickley, he gets a big boost season long if Tom Thibodeau gets his head out of his rear end for the most part, and he should be a big winner in terms of just, whoever loses minutes, he's going to gain minutes.
As a diehard Knicks fan, I sure hope you're right, because Quickley, to me, gives the Knicks something they haven't had in a really long time, and that's somebody who could shoot the ball. And it sounds like a crazy thing where every team has 3-4 shooters on the court at once. The Knicks don't really usually have any for large stretches of games. And so Alfred Payton, he's seen his playing time dip a little bit. He's still the starter. The media keeps asking him, when are you going to make the switch? He says, I'm not planning it anytime soon. But as you said, Kev, this is definitely a long-term play for the rest of the season, because Quickley seems like he's the better guard at this option to start for the Knicks. And I would think, as you said, Tibbs is going to figure it out sooner rather than later.
Well, I hope so. Like Quickley right now, he's only shooting 34% from the field, from three, 40% from the field. I know both look ugly, but if you watch him play, it's clear as day he's the best shooter on this team. Julius Randle's making some threes here and there, but if you look at his shot, it's such a funky shot the way it gets released. And we've seen him year in and year out. He's not a shooter, even though he can shoot. There's such a weird difference between these two terms. Someone who's making their threes isn't necessarily a shooter. I've seen RJ Barrett go 4 for 7 from 3. That doesn't matter. He's not a shooter. Quickley is arguably the best guard on this team. As much as Knicks fans don't want to admit it, given that they did take RJ Barrett 3rd overall, Quickley should be getting 30 minutes per game, if anything. And it's very possible he does if Alfred Payton does get either traded. I know Thibs loves Payton, but maybe the front office kind of forces his hand. But Quickley has some big potential as a scorer with some assists and steals, low turnovers. He might hurt your field goal percentage given that he's on a bad team, but he'll help you with free throws. So I love him in fantasy.
The problem with trading Alfred Payton is you're going to need to find somebody who wants Alfred Payton. That's the big issue I see with that right now, but we will wait and see. I want you to tell me also another young rookie point guard, Cole Anthony.
Cole Anthony's frustrating. This is a guy you really have to be either in a points league that doesn't affect your field goal, or field goals taken don't affect you, or you're punting field goal completely because, the Markelle Fultz injury obviously left a massive hole for the Orlando Magic. He was playing nearly 30 minutes per game, and now they're kind of left with minimal guard options. They let go of DJ Augustin. He's on the Bucks now. So they haven't had Evan Fournier. They don't really have many options in their backcourt. They're playing a ton of Terrence Ross, and he's pretty okay, but he's more of a weird wing. It's like a sixth man more than anything. Fournier is getting back and healthy, which should help Cole Anthony, who was arguably the top prospect out of high school 2 years ago. He had a bad year at UNC last year with he had a foot injury. He was playing on an awful team. I think they were below 500 in the standings. And there was just a lot of bad luck for Anthony. He's a talented prospect. He has the pedigree, former top overall prospect. So they're going to try to play him and kind of integrate him into the team because the Magic, they're winning games, but they're not a good team. They have Vucevic playing as high of a level for a big man as you can have, essentially below that Anthony Davis tier. So they want to get the most out of this guy. Maybe he could be the guard of the future because with Fultz out and Fultz having his shooting issues, it would be a huge plus to have someone like Anthony playing at a high level. They're giving him minutes. He's played over 28 minutes per game over the past, or at least since January 6th. And I believe that's when Fultz did get injured. So having that high, those high minutes, a high usage, he's scoring about 10 points per game in that range. He's getting good rebounds. His assists are about 3 or 4 per game. He gets you some steals as well. So if you can take that field goal hit, bank on Cole Anthony, maybe breaking out later on. He's still kind of figuring it out on the court because with that foot injury last year, he didn't get too much playtime in college in his 1 year. So he's a flyer. He's a speculative ad, but he can help you across some categories right now.
Roy Williams at UNC last year. They asked him about the team. The team was struggling, and he said this is the least talented team he's ever coached. And I think a lot of that has to do with Anthony missing a good portion of that year with the injury, as you said. Cole Anthony, he's a project, like you just said, because he missed a lot of time in college, and now he's kind of the only guard who's worth looking at in fantasy. Fournier's been out. I know he's coming back, but I don't really see a lot of options on this Magic team to score. So they're going to rely on Cole Anthony. So he is worth a flyer for sure. Lastly, let's get to some injuries here. CJ McCollum, unfortunately, he was having what looked like his first ever All-Star campaign. He's hurt now. Kev, who are guys who could take up his minutes and really benefit from the injury fantasy wise?
Well, the biggest winner fantasy-wise is going to be Damian Lillard, because he's going to soak up a ton of that usage and be the primary option on that team. They lost Nurkic. They have Rodney Hood, who's coming back. And I know Rodney Hood might be an appealing option after scoring about 20 points in the starting role this past game. I just can't trust him seeing what he's done this year. Rodney Hood's been such an up and down player coming off his, I believe he had a foot he didn't have a foot injury. He tore his Achilles a couple years ago, and he averaged roughly 10 to 15 minutes per game up until this game on January 18th against the San Antonio Spurs. He got 25 minutes, had a 64% field goal percentage, 21 points, 2 threes. That looks really good, but like up until that, he had 7 points total in the 6 games before that. I'm not going to buy in. I think Gary Trent Jr. is the pickup here. If anyone, Gary Trent Jr., he's 6'6". He can alternate between shooting guard and small forward. They're probably going to have to use Robert Covington a ton more at center with the Nurkic injury, given that Kanter isn't a good rim protector. They're going to play Kanter a ton at C, obviously, because he's literally the backup option. But when teams opposite them go small, they're going to have to go Robert Covington. They can slide Trent over to the small forward spot. And Trent's been pretty solid. He's averaging about, before this past game, he was averaging about 10 points per game. He gets you a couple rebounds. He'll get you some good threes too. He can average about 2 to 3 threes per game. His field goal percentage isn't going to be fantastic, but if he can get you the threes, get you that scoring, he could even average about a steal per game as well. He was doing that last year when he had an expanded role. So Trent, he's not going to win you your league, but he could be a solid glue guy option. It's not really too appealing. If you own Damian Lillard, you get the most benefit out of this, but if you're desperate for a pickup in a 12 team and more league, Trent's going to be the guy. He was averaging 22 minutes per game last year. He's at 25 or 24 this year. I think he can get up to 26, 27. So yeah, he's your guy.
That is why he's the roto surgeon. Kev, thank you so much for joining me here on the first ever episode of The Hedge. I'm really looking forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, definitely, Steve. Thanks for having me on. Hopefully we can keep this rolling week in and week out. So thanks to everybody for tuning in.
Thanks again to Kev. You can follow him on Twitter at RotoSurgeon. Up next, we're going to talk to the great Kenny Bets Big and see if we can pick up some NBA picks. Kenny, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Hey, what's going on, Steve? I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Pretty excited to get into it.
So obviously you're a big time, bettor here. And with this being the first episode of The Hedge, I want to explain to our listeners what goes into your decision-making process when making NBA bets.
Yeah, so it's there's a lot that does go into it. I find a lot of people when they're first starting out, they mainly just look at like team records or I guess like a lot of the Lakers, right? Teams that stand out to them, teams they know that are playing well, and they usually just put their money on those games and heavy favorites, and that's like a big no-no, especially in the gambling world. There's a lot of different things you want to consider, like our teams playing on like a back-to-back, so like a second leg of a back-to-back. I know I gave you guys the Knicks pick yesterday. The reason why I like that was the Warriors were playing a second game of a back-to-back. There was their third game in a 4-day stretch. So those, you got to consider, like, these guys how many minutes are they playing, travel, or do they have a game where they got to hop on a plane right after they finish this game and fly across the country to play another game tomorrow? You know what I mean? Like, these are human beings. I know, we watch Steph Curry and LeBron James at home on TV and we think they're like superheroes, but at the end of the day, they still are human beings, so like, you still have to consider the human factor to it, right? Like, just look at like Paul George last year in the bubble, right? So I don't know if you followed that whole bubble scenario, which was on the Clippers, where like, his ex-girlfriend was dating Austin Rivers. Did you follow that at all?
Of course, Pandemic P. There was a whole thing. I well aware of it.
Exactly. And everyone was ripping Paul George for that. And like, dude, this guy's a human being. Imagine any one of us being in that situation where like your girlfriend's dating your teammate, and it would just be a disaster. No one wants to go out there and play basketball.
I mean, you had, what was it? Paul George was dating Doc Rivers' daughter for a while too, who's now, she's married. She's like married to like Seth Curry. And so I was always like, how is that relationship going to go between Doc and Paul George? And then all of a sudden you have Paul George basically blaming his performance on Doc Rivers. So I was like, okay, so that's how that relationship went after all.
Yeah, no, it was that was like a soap opera to follow. It was so much going on. I can't even follow it and keep up with it. But yeah, no. So like, little things like that, you definitely have to consider those, like the human element of things, right? Also like, diving into more analytical side of things, like let's look at the Jazz Pelicans game yesterday. The Pelicans are one of the worst teams in the league defending the three. The Jazz are the number one team shooting the three. They scored the most percentage of points in the league from the three ball. And what ended up happening? The Jazz came out and they just absolutely throttled the Pelicans last night. They just it was a barrage of threes constantly. Yeah.
I mean, that's how you get, over for Donovan Mitchell and things like that, and over total points. I really want to go back to this Knick thing for a second. I'm a diehard Knick fan, obviously. And I'm listening to your video last night about the Knicks the Knicks not only covering the spread on 4.5 points, but they actually won the game. They blew out the Warriors. And I'm like, this guy, he knows everything, it seems like. And just, now the Knicks are playing a back-to-back. They're playing in Sacramento tonight. Is that something you would avoid now because those fresh legs are no longer fresh?
Yeah. So one, like we talked a little bit before the show, we both agree. We think the Knicks are playing a little bit above where they really are. Right. So, huge win last night for them. Right now, I do lean Sacramento Kings. Let me pull up the money here. So like another thing with that Knicks game last night is there was about 90% of the money on the Golden State Warriors. So anytime you see something like that, it's just a big red flag, right? Like you definitely don't want to bet on the Warriors in that situation because the house always wins. So if the house is always winning, they're not going to, the games where they have their biggest liability, there's probably a good chance they're going to win those games too, right? Which, the Knicks won last night. So, so looking at tonight's game for the Knicks, let me pull it up here. And what I'm looking at, guys, I just use a few different, services that pull from different sports books, like where the money is coming in. There's different companies like Action Network, Don's Best, Sports Insights. But, those different services, what they do is they tell you, the percentage of bets on a game or the percentage of money on a game. And that's key. Like if you're not looking at that, you really shouldn't be betting any money on these games. So let's pull it up right here.
Now, Kenny, when you're doing that and you see all the money is on one team and you still love that team, do you avoid that bet then? So hypothetically, if all the money yesterday is on the Knicks, but you still really believe in the Knicks to win that game, are you going to just avoid that bet? Or are you going to bet the opposite just because that's where the public went?
No, yeah, I'll definitely avoid that game. It took me a long time to realize this. You don't have to bet every game. That's a big pitfall that a lot of people make is they just, they just want the action. And unfortunately, you're just going to end up in a huge hole if that's what you're doing, chasing action. So yeah, like, I have like a pretty much like it's like an onion, like different layers I peel off of like, I look at, initially I'll look and I'll like see the lines and I'll put, 6-7 games together. And then I'll start really diving into it, looking where the money is, the analytics, like I talked about, are any players out, injuries, things like that. And then I'll either take teams out or, I'll leave them in. So yeah, like let's say last night, all the money was on the Knicks, even though I liked the Knicks, I wouldn't have bet it. And it definitely, sometimes it, backfires and I'm like, dang, I should have just went with it. I would have won anyway. But more often than not, when, I see all the money on the team I like and I avoid it, it does work out in my favor. So yeah, that's, definitely another thing for the people listening at home. Just, you guys don't have to bet every single game.
I want to talk about these Friday night games. I mean, things are changing by the minute, but as of now, we have 11 games here on this Friday night. For me personally, I have two things I'm rolling with at this very moment. To me, the Brooklyn Nets and the way they're playing offensively and the lack of defense, I'm hitting that over 224 points against the Cleveland Cavaliers. They have hit on this over, the Nets and their opponent, in their last 10 games. You just saw what they did with Cleveland a couple of days ago. I really think, to me, that's a number that I was surprised was as low as it was.
The public does win too, but just let me point this out to you guys. Right now it's about 74% of the bets on that over, but only about 60% of the money. So usually what that indicates is a little bit more of like a square better going and taking the over there. Obviously,
so is that something you would avoid?
All good things come to an end, Steve, they may come out. Here's what I'm looking at in that game, right? You have the Brooklyn Nets just got embarrassed by the Cavaliers the other day. So I think they're going to come out and definitely clamp down on defense to try to shut this Cavs team down. And then you also have a Brooklyn Nets team with a ton of new pieces. And, you touched on how they've hit 10 straight overs. Only one of those games was with Kyrie Irving. I personally think this Brooklyn Nets team is way better without Kyrie. I think with Kyrie and James Harden, I think it's going to be a lot of, cluster in the middle, too much dribbling. So it remains, I think, with all that dribbling, it could potentially slow down the pace of play. So I would be careful with that. And that's maybe one thing to, it's more of like a wait and see approach, right? Like just wait and see how the next few games play out with Kyrie in the lineup and see how they mesh as a team.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something to keep in mind. I mean, Cleveland has not been great defensively over their last 2-3 games, but overall on the season, they're top 5 in points allowed, 106.1. Only the Knicks, Lakers, and Jazz have been better. So that's definitely something to consider there. Will they, slow down the pace and not, play that quick game that they played 2 days ago? Just because it went one way, what was it, Wednesday night, doesn't mean it's going to go that way again here Friday. So that's definitely something to consider. I think I am still going to take that bet, so we'll talk about that another day. But also player props now. Victor Oladipo for me, I think he is the guy for me. 23.5 points over against the Detroit Pistons, and I'll tell you why. So Oladipo, he's played 2 games with the Rockets. The first game was fantastic. He was doing everything. He scored 32 points. The second game, he could not hit any shots, and he still put up 22 points. He hit the over, and wow. It's just they don't have any offense right now. I mean, John Wall's hurt. Christian Wood has his ankle. I think it was an ankle issue. I think it was, and he's probably not going to play. So who's really going to score in that team? I think Oladipo is going to take all the shots in the world against a so-so Pistons, defense.
Yeah, no, and Oladipo, in my opinion, he's one of my favorite players in the league. I'm very happy to see how he came back after that gruesome injury, and, you kind of got to feel bad for the guy. He got bounced out of Oklahoma, came to the Pacers, and he was the franchise player there. And then just like that, they deal him. So yeah, I'm rooting for him. Personally, I think, I'm hoping he comes to Houston, lights it up there. I love John Wall. I love the team there they have together, even though it's like kind of like it's like the Bad News Bears team, right? They're just kind of like pitch potch together.
Yeah, that's exactly the word I would use.
Yeah, but for some, they have a lot of good pieces, and if they do play well and they click, they could be a decent squad, honestly. So yeah. I like that bet, honestly. I think Oladipo should come out firing for sure, and like you said, he's their only option to score.
Yeah, I think it was encouraging from a betting point of view that even though his shot wasn't falling, he didn't just start distributing the ball and passing around. He was just shooting and shooting and shooting. And I think that would continue against the Detroit Pistons Friday night.
Yeah, and you gotta figure that those guys on the Rockets, they're just happy to be able to get some shots up right after James Harden's finally out of town. Like those guys, they haven't touched a basketball in years playing with James Harden.
Yeah, I definitely think that's really interesting to see how that team progresses as the year goes on. They have a dismal record right now, so if things continue the way they are, maybe they flip Oladipo again at the trade deadline in a couple months. But for now, I think he's going to keep shooting his shot and see if we can hit a couple of overs along the way.
It's actually I didn't even think of that. It's actually a good point. It's probably what they're going to try and do, probably unload him to a contender for a couple picks and just stock up, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm honestly surprised it worked out. I'm surprised they didn't keep Karis LeVert. I love LeVert. I think he's like a little baby KD.
Yeah, I don't really get the I love Oladipo too, but I don't really get the LeVert for Oladipo thing when Oladipo is a free agent and Karis LeVert has 3 years on his deal.
Yeah, and it worked out. He's got the mass on his kidney, but there's no way Houston knew that.
Right, because who knows what Houston's plan is for Oladipo. We just said they could trade him. I don't think they're going to throw him a max contract after this. But again, it depends on how he plays. It depends on the team plays around him, because John Wall's going to be around there for a few years. Christian Wood's going to be around there for a few years. So these are big games for Oladipo.
Shout out to John Wall's agent, right? Dude, John Wall didn't play basketball for 2-3 years. The guy's getting paid over $50 million a year.
I remember when Brad Beal got his first big extension before Wall did. And basically Wall came out and was like, how is my sidekick making more money than me?
Yeah.
And that's going to go on freezing takes or something, because
look at Brad Beal now, right? He's incredible. And he's one of the most underrated players in the league. I don't think he's ever been voted to an All-Star game.
I think he's made 2 All-Star games, but
I think he was a reserve though.
Yeah.
That's right. I don't think he was ever voted in by the fans, which is nuts. He's such a great player. And, you see some of these guys that have made it over him and you're just sitting there scratching your head.
The fans and the coaches, they reward winning teams for sure. And Beal, unfortunately, has not been part of a winner in some time. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm thinking with my bets. Is there anything else you want to tell our listeners before we wrap up the show?
Yeah. So, it's still early today in the day, so I don't really have any of the games that I'm betting on yet. I don't send out bets to my clients until I actually bet them myself. But some games that are just, jumping out to me right now, the Orlando Magic +4, the Pacers just came off of a West Coast road trip. We talked about how they just traded Oladipo, who for a while was their franchise player. So it's interesting to see how over the next week or so, how they, bounce back after that, especially without having Karis LeVert in the lineup. So I think, initially right after that trade, we saw the Pacers, they came out and they played well. I think that could just be a little bit of a momentum thing, they lost one of their players. They're coming out playing hard. But now that it's about a week after that trade, I think we're going to maybe see the Pacers kind of tail off a little bit. And the Magic, they've been playing great basketball. Cole Anthony, he hit a game winner the other day versus the Timberwolves. And, Cole Anthony was supposed to be one of the best players, coming into college last year. He got hurt at North Carolina, didn't have a great season. And the Magic were able to scoop him up, later in the first round, which he probably wouldn't have been there if he, stayed healthy his, the 1 year in college. So I think they got an absolute stud in Cole Anthony, and they have a lot of good talent around him, with Nikola Vucevic. So I like the Magic here +4. And, we talked about the Kings. I think the Kings are a nice play here for sure. Knicks playing a second leg of a back-to-back on a West Coast trip. So, it's always those teams come out a little sluggish or lackluster, and the Kings have just been absolutely awful. They've been abysmal on defense. One of the worst. They're literally on pace to be one of the worst defensive teams in league history. So whether that continues or not, I like to be I'm a believer things usually regress back to the norm, back to the average, So I think the Kings, should start to turn up a little bit defensively. And I think we'll see a good game out of them tonight for sure against a Knicks team that is definitely overperforming.
We had Kev on earlier in the show the roto surgeon himself to talk about a couple of streamers for fantasy basketball he liked. And one of those guys was Cole Anthony. He was raving about Cole Anthony and how he's basically the only Magic guard you can count on right now with Fultz hurt and Fournier just coming back from an injury. So I really am excited to see what we get out of Cole Anthony going forward. But thank you so much, Kenny, for coming on. You can find Kenny on Instagram at KennyBetsBig, and we'll be back next Friday for episode 2 of The Hedge. For now, keep it locked in on the game day.
Good luck, guys.